This is Andrew Stein. I'm just here to introduce the seminar. I'm pleased that so many people have come along today, and what Murray's going to share with you is actually very exciting and really useful. My only point that I'm going to make today is I would encourage everybody who comes today to try as soon as possible some of the things Murray's showing you, because they're the sort of things that you'll take in, think are wonderful, and then it's very easy to forget when you get back to Excel. So my advice is really try it out. I've done that. Export some data from Donman, read into Excel, and try some things he's showing you, because they are very exciting. And you'll be able to run some wonderful reports and do some wonderful analysis on your donor files. So without any more ado, I'm just going to hand over to Murray, who's going to take you through today's exciting presentation.
Hi everybody. This is going to be a little bit different to what we would normally be doing in one of our webinars, because the emphasis is more on Microsoft Excel rather than something in Donman. And a lot of what I'll be covering will be to do with how to export that data, and then once we've got it, we'll put that into Excel. So I'm not going to be actually concentrating on so much on the Donman side. So let's get going. Now, Excel's got some wonderful ways of analyzing your data, and some of those things include things like there are subtotal reports, you've got some what-if analysis type options there, you've got pivot charts, and then the thing that we're going to cover today are pivot tables. Now, we can use a number of different things within Donman to extract the data, but usually something like Visual Reporter, or VisRep for short, or one of the other reporter tools is probably the best thing to do that, because it gives us added flexibility in the sort of information that we can export. Today I'll be using Microsoft Excel 2010. If you've got 2007 version of Excel, it's going to be fairly similar. There may be one or two options there that I have that you don't, but they're probably some of the more, or the less likely to be used ones. If you've got MS Excel 2003, then you'll be able to do some of the basic stuff, but perhaps some of the more detailed things may not be available to you. It's not a tutorial. I'm not going to show you how to do everything, although we will go through it, but we might be going a little bit too fast for that. But the idea is that we can show you the sort of things that you can do, because quite often to get the information that you want from a report in Donman, we've got lots and lots of different reports, but they may not be the one that you want, and it may not analyze it in exactly the same way that you want. I've based this on this particular website which I found, and it just sort of interested me, because for a number of years I've used pivot tables but never actually read anything. I've just sort of worked it out. I've also got a second website here that we're using that I've done as well. You can use those and go to those at any time that you like, and you can learn all sorts of stuff, a lot more than what we're covering today. I have provided a tips and tricks that won't actually be used in any of the monthly newsletters, but if you go to the Donman community on the ASI website, that should be up there in the next day or two. And of course, as Andrew said, this presentation should be available soon also on the website, so that you can go through, stop it at any point and try things out. I do need to put a proviso here that I'm not an expert in pivot table. I just like to have a bit of a play. So I apologize in advance if you ask some questions that I can't answer, but anyway, that's it. So let's get started. So the first point is that we need to be able to export raw data from Donman. And as I mentioned before, we have a number of tools that we can do that with. So here I am in my special version. I say special because I've got some data in there that should be useful for what we're trying to do. I'm going to go to the Reports menu, then to Reporter, and I'm going to use VisRep, or Visual Report Writer. Now, I'm not using the actual wizard. There is a wizard if you need some help along the way. I'll just use this in its normal form. Now, we have a large number of data files that contain the raw data, and VisRep is great for producing reports from that. But one of the things that is difficult to do in Visual Reporter is to kind of do analysis of information that's coming from a number of different sources. So today I'm going to use a typical file that most people are probably going to analyze, and that's going to be the donation file. So from my drop-down list there, I simply pick donations. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick donations from the year 2009, 10 and 11, 9, 10 and 11, that's correct. So a complete year. And so in order to make that my report a little bit more efficient, I'm actually going to choose the output order of donation date. Now I need to tell it which donations that I want to output. So I'm going to first of all set a new criterion, and from the drop-down list there, I'm going to pick donation date. And rather than saying that donation date is equal to something, I'm going to say greater than or equal to. Now I can in here put in 01/01/2009 as the first date. That's fine, and I can do the same thing for the last date. So if I put in the end date, I can say donation date is less than or equal to, and I can put in the 31st of the 12th, 2011. Now that's fine, and that'll pick up the data that I'm after. However, if you want to be able to do this perhaps in a year's time, and we want to save this report, rather than using specific dates, we can use date variables. And by clicking on F at the end there, it gives you an idea of some of the variables that we can use. So we can use T for today, and we can go plus or minus any number of days. F is the start of the current financial year. Q1 through to Q4 is the beginning of the current quarters. Same thing for months. W is for the start of the current week. And you've got a capital Y, I'm not sure where that is, for the start of the current year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want this to start with, first of all, a Y. And down the bottom here, you can see that's put in the start of this year. And if I go minus Y3, that will subtract 3 years from the start of this year, and you can see that's now got the 1st of the 1st, 2009. And I can do the same sort of thing here, and I can go start of the current year minus, I'll subtract 2 years, and you'll see that currently that's the 1st of the 1st, 2010. But if I subtract 1 day from that, that's now the date range that I want. And the advantage of doing this is if I save this report and bring it up next year, it will automatically do it from 2010 to 2012. So by doing that, I don't have to keep modifying it. Okay, so by putting no other criteria there, I'm actually selecting every single donation within that date range. Now the last thing that I need to do is to tell it which fields or which bits of information I want to output. Now at the moment this is sorted by the name alphabetically. I'm just going to sort it based on the order that it appears there, because most of the fields that I want are going to be at the beginning. So I'm going to pick the donor number, so I can just double click on that, and that will appear over on the left-hand side. I want the amount, I want the campaign code, I want the donation date. I'll take the chart account code, that's the ledger code in case I want that. I'll take the pay method. I don't think I've got any donation types, but a lot of you probably are using donation type, so I'll take that. Now, that's probably all I want from my actual donation record, but every single donation record ties in to a donor record. So if I want to include information about the donor themselves, where I've got donation here, I can simply change that and look at the donors file, and again now I have a list of the fields from the donor file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take things like the donor type. Oops, too far. I'll take the donor type. Maybe you want to do some sort of analysis based on the source code. So I'll take the source code. Maybe I want to know what their gender is, so I can go down and I can select sex. Now, you may also wish to use information that comes from the campaign, because every single donation links back to one and only one campaign. So if I now look at the drop-down list here, I can pick campaign. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the group code from here. So this looks like, oops, there it was. So I'm going to take the campaign group. Now if I go to preview, you can see what my report's going to look like. And there's going to be many, many pages of this information. I'm now going to export that as a text file. Now to do that, I simply go File, Save Report Data as Text. and I'll give it a file name there, and I'll call it Murray. Okay, this is going to create a tab-separated file, tab delimited, and it's going to have a header row at the top. So I go OK, and that's now finished. So that's all I'm going to cover in terms of the Donman side of things, but clearly you can export any information that's in Donman using VisRep, because we have access to every single file. I'll just go back to the Data tab, and in this file here you can see all the different files in Donman. So every bit of data that's stored somewhere in Donman you can export from that using VisRep. Okay, I'm now going to go into Excel. Oops, no, that's not Excel. Oops, I haven't got that started. So, trying to find it up here. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to import that file into Excel. Now a lot of you are probably familiar with doing this. When you do your mailouts, quite often from your selection file, you'll create a tab delimited file that you import into Excel. Well, basically I'm going to do exactly the same sort of thing, except mine wasn't created from an appeal or from a selection file. It was created directly from VisRep. So I just go File, Open. Now I need to navigate to the particular place where my data is. So I'm going to go to my special place. Yours is probably going to be called Donman. So I've got a Donman directory, and then I go to DM Work. And while I could change this to text files and look through all the files, I know my file is called murray.txt, and it now comes up with this thing called the text import wizard. Now, sometimes we need to go through each of the individual stages. There are about 3 stages. In this case, because I know the sort of data that I've got, I can actually go finish, but I won't. So I'm going to go next. So you can see, sorry, up the top here, it's already worked out that it's probably a delimited file, and it is because we exported this as a tab delimited file. I go next. By default, it's tab. So you can see already down here, you can see that it's worked out how to split up that data. I can go next here. Now, this is where, on occasion, depending on the sort of data that you're exporting, you may need to say highlight a field and tell it to bring it in as text rather than general. But for the information that I've got here, there's nothing I need to do that with, so I go finish, and here's my report. And if I just highlight everything and expand those, I've got my all of my data here. And if I go Control-End, that takes me to the bottom, and you can see I've got 695 records, of which the first one up the top is the header row. So basically there's 694 donation records within that 3-year span. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a pivot table based on all of this data. So to do that, I basically just highlight all of the columns of my data. I go up to Insert, and the first option there is Pivot Table, so I just click on that. So it's already picked the range of data that I'm using. It's going to create a new worksheet, although if you wanted to, you could place it into an existing worksheet. So I just go OK, and this is the screen that I get. So there's no information on it, but over on the right-hand side here, you've got a list of all of the different columns that you've got, or the fields, and then I've got 4 boxes down here that we're going to use. Now, I'm going to start the report off by saying I want my breakdown based on the campaign group. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the group and drag it to the row labels, and now you see already it's analyzed the data based on the campaign group, and it's given me a list of the campaign groups that are currently being used. Across the top, let's first of all look at pay method. So if I drag pay method into the column labels, you can now see all the different pay methods that are used in the data that I'm using for my pivot table. Now, we need to fill the information in here with some data. So I'm going to take the amount field and I drag it to the sigma values box down there, and suddenly I've got some information there. Now it says in here count of amount, or if I look down the bottom as well, it also says count of amount. Now that's fine, it's the number of donations, but let's first of all look at the dollar amount. So by simply clicking on this and choosing value field settings, instead of having the count, I can do sum. And if I just go OK, we now have the total amount of money that we've got for each of these different campaign groups based on the way that the pay method. Now, this is actually dollar amounts. So let's format that so that they actually come up as dollar amounts. So again, I'm going to go to sum of amount and value field settings. And down the bottom, I've got that number format box. And the first time it seems to be a bit slow for me, but it now comes up, and I'm going to make that currency. I go OK and OK again, and suddenly my spreadsheet or my pivot table is now showing dollar amounts. Let's say you don't want it split up by pay method, but you want it split up by donor type. I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to drag donor type in there, and now you can see the donor types that have been used for those donations over that three-year period. And again, it's split up by the campaign groups. Now, at the moment it's saying sum of amount. We can actually change that as well. So rather than say that, I'm going to say maybe just donation or something of that nature. And if I go OK now, it says donation. Let's change the column again. We're now going to change this to the date. So I'm going to drag the date down there. And now what you're seeing here is a column for every single date upon which a donation, at least one donation, was made. And of course I can go way across there. Now that's way too much information. What we can now do is we can now group those together. And I do that by right-clicking on any of those and selecting the group option. Now at the first one that's come up with is months. Now this can be a little bit deceptive. If I go OK to that, you can see there it's got, I don't know what happened there. It's got the months up until August, and if I go further across, I've got all the way through to December. What that's actually doing is, like for this month of January, that's looking at all donations to the campaign group, in this case donation, but that could be January in 2009, 2010, or 2011. So that's really not that useful to me. If I right-click and go group again, I can click on years, and now it's going to give me a breakdown by both years and months. So now I've got, here is 2009, and then I've got all of those months for 2009. What happened there? Probably gone across. Okay, not entirely sure why I've got some of. Oh, I think I might have actually exported data. Perhaps, I actually exported only for 1 year. I should have exported for 3 years. So let's go back to my report. I might actually close this down. I'll just get rid of that. I apologize for that. That's a mistake on my part. I've been doing something else this morning along a similar sort of line. So I've still got my VisRep report running. So I'll just change this date. I'll just make it Y-1. And so if we look down the bottom, it's now the 31st of the 12th, 2011. So that's really what I wanted. So I'll just export that again. And I'll call it murray.txt. Yes to overwrite. Okay, so now when I go back to my spreadsheet, I should be able to just go recent, read that file in again. I can go finish here. There's my data. I'll just insert, pivot table, okay. And then so down the side I took my group down to there. Across the top I took my donation date and I took amount, popped that in there. Field settings, I'll change that to sum. I change this one up the top to donation, oops. And I'll change the number format again to currency. So, okay. And then I'll just do the grouping again. So I'll group and I'll do it by years. So you can see very quickly I can get back to where I was before. Here is 2009 with each of the months for 2009. But now we see 2010 and each of the months for those. Again, if I only want to see that at a year-by-year level, when I go to group, I just remove months. And if I go back now, here I have my 3 years. So very, very simple way of actually grouping those into whichever way that you want to do that. Now, let's suppose we're not interested in all of these particular campaign groups. Where I've got this drop-down box here for row labels, at the moment you can see that all of those campaign groups are highlighted. But if I say get rid of sales and say members, and I don't want the blank, now my report only shows those particular campaign groups that I'm interested in. Similarly, across the top, if I suddenly say, look, I want to get rid of 2009 and I just want 2010 and 2011, there I have it. Okay, let's go back to everything that we had before, but I don't need that, or I don't need blank. And again, for the rows, I'll get rid of, well, I'll just add the ones that I want back in. So now we've pretty much got all the data that we want. What we can also do is we can use some filtering. So if I go to this row labels here and use value filters, I can say greater than or equal to, and I'll take donation greater than or equal to, say, $10,000. Now, just by looking down here, you can see that pledge in total only raised $1,300 and sales only raised $6,000. So by applying this filter here, those two have now disappeared. And so you can do all sorts of filtering based on values or anything along those lines, rather than necessarily manually picking the particular things that you want. So I'm just going to clear that now. So I now come back to my original file. Let's suppose now I want to do it by campaign as well as campaign group. Now, every campaign should be part of a campaign group. What I can do is I can actually grab campaign and move it down to the row. So now, as you can see here, I've got, for donation, there is only one campaign, and that's donation. But for my events campaign group, you can see that there are actually quite a number of different campaigns that make up the total for events. So now we've actually got a breakdown by campaign group, and within campaign group, we've got the breakdown by the actual campaign itself. So you can do that to all sorts of different levels. If you wanted to change it around, and I don't think it probably works too much here, but I'm just going to grab that and move it up to there. And so, yeah, you've got campaign, and within that, you've got campaign group. But of course, because each campaign only has one campaign group, it's a pretty silly thing because you only get one on each. So I'll just move that back the way it was before. But you can see that every time you make a change, it just instantly updates it. Now, I've only got, I think there's something like a few thousand donations here. So if you've got a larger amount, it might take a second or two to update. But it's very fast, it's very flexible, and it just means that you can go, oh, I'm interested, let me try that. Oh, no, that doesn't really work. Let me try that. Oh, yes, I like that. Now, at the moment, we're only showing for each of those the total dollar amount. I might actually remove the campaign group so that we have a fairly simple, oh, what have I done? Oh, sorry, I was down a bit too far. So again, we've gone back to just the campaign groups. What I'll do now is I'll add a second value for each of these, and we'll add the count. So again, I'm just going to grab amount, I'm going to drag it down to the values, and it defaults to count. So what I'm seeing now is for the year 2009, I have both the donation amount and the count of donations for this particular campaign group. And again, for each of the different campaign groups, you can see the amount. If I'd prefer count to come first, all I have to do is drag that up in front of donation, and now you've got the count. And like we did before, with count, I can simply click on there, go value field settings, and I'll just make it maybe count rather than count of amount. All right, so now it says count, donation, count, donation, count, donation. So here's my 3 years, and I've got the values for each of those. Let me change it and say, well, I don't want those to be in the same column. I would like, the same row. I want them to be in the same count. So what I'm going to do, you'll notice that when we put in this second value into the sigma values box, it actually creates this little entry here, the sigma values, and it's put that into columns. But if I drag that down to row, now suddenly, for each year I've got the count and the donation for each of those campaign groups. So it kind of makes it a little bit more readable. Let's add a third one. Let's suppose we want to know what the average donation is. I can drag amount down again. It's now got, at the moment, count of amount. From my list there, I pick value field settings. I go to average, and you'll see there are quite a number of other options there. But we'll go for average. I'll change that to just maybe AVG. And because this is going to be a dollar value, I'll also change the format to currency. I go OK, and again, I have a very simple report that gives you a lot of detail based on the raw data that Donman has provided. Now, we can do certain levels of formatting as well. That's a fairly plain report. When we're in any of these fields here, up the top there you've got extra options which say pivot table tools, of which one is design. So if I bring up the design ribbon, I can change that in any way that I like. From the drop-down list here, I've got plenty of other different options there. And I can also say, yeah, I want bands there or bands down that way, whichever you want, whatever looks good for you. So in terms of the formatting, there's a lot that you can do. If you're going to be giving this to somebody as an end result, you might not want these things here. So we can get rid of row headers and column headers as well, although that didn't, sorry, that got rid of something different. But there are ways of getting rid of that. Off the top of my mind, top of my head, I can't quite remember what that is. Okay, I'm just looking through my notes here. Okay, we have a box here that we haven't used at this stage. This is the filter. Now let's suppose at the moment we've got this report there, you want to be able to divide that up based on, say, the sex. So if I drag sex into there, you'll notice up in the top corner there, we've now got a box next to it with a drop down. So at the moment we're getting all data, so it doesn't matter what sex they are, but let's suppose I only want to look at donations from the males. So if I click on M and go OK, the data that I get now is purely from donations from male donors. Again, I can do the same thing for the females, or if I want to do several of them, I can click in the select multiple items and then I just tick the boxes of the ones that I want. And there is my result. So you get virtually instantaneous results from what you're trying to do. Let me go back and put that back to all so that we're looking at all of our data. Now, sorry, let me just look at my notes. Okay, let's suppose we're looking at this and we go, okay, that's interesting. We've got 27 people from sales in the year, whatever, 2010. I want to have a look at those. All I have to do is double click on it, and now I suddenly have all of the raw data that was used to generate that information. And what it's actually done is it's created a new sheet of that data. So you can play with that and it won't affect the raw data. My raw data is still sitting in this one called Murray. My new pivot table was in sheet 1. So again, if I wanted to say, look at that $460 from the 28 donations, I just double click on it and it simply brings them up there. Let's just delete these because we don't need those anymore. Okay, so we're back to our spreadsheet. Now, that's using filtering. There is another way of doing that. If we go up to pivot table and use the options, there's this facility called slicing. If I say insert slicing, I can say I want to slice on the sex and perhaps on the donor type as well. And when I go OK, what I end up with is these two little boxes here, which is currently showing me the different donor types in use and the different values of sex. Now, like we did with our filter, we can actually pick particular ones. So I can just simply click on that and it gives me just the results for male or female, or if I use Control or Shift, I can then select multiple ones. So if I want just the males, and you can see for males the donor types there, let's say I just want the male company results, there we go. Now there's not a lot of those, but you can see how easy it is to do that. Let me just drag this up a little bit more. If we want females, maybe the individuals, there we have the female donations from females, individuals. So again, you can highlight as many or as few of those as you want to define which group of people that you want. Okay, and then if we want, once we're done, we can just say get rid of that. Why is that not working? It must be right click. Okay, so anyway, so I'll just right click on those and remove donor type. And if I go back again to this one, right click, remove sex. So I'm now back to where I am. Now, let me add the amount again. Now that might seem a bit strange, but I've now got, well, I'll change again that to value field settings. I'm going to make that the sum again. I'll maybe call it sum. Well, actually, I'm going to call that difference. I will go over to here, and it says show values as, and it currently says no calculation. But what I can do is I can do all sorts of special stuff there. So I can look at percentages or something along those lines. I'm actually going to use difference from, and I'm going to choose difference on based on the donation date, which is here, and I'm going to do it difference from the previous. So I'll go to number format and do it as currency. I go OK, and then OK again. So now what we've got is we've got the donation, say for, this is the donation campaign group. We've got donation in the first year, in 2009, we had $275,000. In the second year, we went up to $318,000, which is an increase of $42,000. We then went to $440,000, and that's an increase again on the previous year of $126,000. Down in events, we've gone from $80,000 down to 16, which is a loss of $17,500. The next year, we went down a further $3,000 to $59,000. So again, very, very simple way of setting this up for you to do that. Now, there were a number of other things that we could have done there. I've done difference, but if I go into there, show values as, difference from, we saw all those percentages. There's also ranks and things of that nature. We can do running totals. So if you want sort of a year by year increasing, we could have done that one as well. So again, you'll notice that wherever we go, I'm using perhaps one or two options, of which there are many, many more on top of that. So essentially, I'm not going to cover all of those because it becomes rather mind-boggling, and in many cases I've never played with those. But it's a great way to go in and just have a play and see what it does, and if you don't like it, you can simply undo it. Now, there were some other things as well. Now, if I go back to the Options tab here, now this is going to be interesting because I can't quite see everything I want there, but field headers here gets rid of those drop-down options there that we saw earlier on. Now, I'm not quite sure how I can actually get to it. There is an option up here which says fields, items, and sets. And because I can't seem to get to that, I'm not sure how I can get across that. But, oh, I can possibly do it with calculations. But what it enables you to do is you can create your own field, which is the result of calculations based on information in your raw data. In our case, there's probably no calculations that would make any sense. But if you had some raw data that had a count and a dollar value per count, perhaps if you were working on the product system, then you could simply say, well, the total value of sales for that particular product would be the total sold times the dollar value of each of those items. And then you could use that. That would appear in this list over here as a calculated value, and you could then make use of that anywhere that you like by dragging it into the appropriate boxes as well. So that's pretty much the end of what I was going to show you. There are, as I said, lots of different options that are available to you. When you're in the actual pivot table itself, if you're in here, you get these pivot table tools for design. You can actually create your own designs as well. So if you want to change colors and what gets highlighted and what doesn't, we can do that as well. So really, if there's a report that you can't quite generate correctly in Donman itself, then you can perhaps do it here. Now, just as an example of somebody I helped this morning using a pivot table, they wanted to be able to do something that was quite unusual. We have a program that can select donors who have given a single donation, or at least one donation, in a certain range of time, at least one per year over a period of time. This particular client wanted a list of those donors who had given at least twice per year in 3 out of the last 5 years. Now, our program could have handled if it was at least one donation and they wanted 3 out of the last 5 years, but to do the two, we didn't have anything that we could do it. So what she ended up doing was creating 5 selection files which represented donors who had given at least 2 donations in each of the 5 years that she was interested in. Each selection file, of course, is just a list of donor numbers. So she read each of those into Excel, created one big spreadsheet with all of those people there. So some donor numbers would appear once, some would appear twice, and some would appear anywhere through to up to 5. We then added an extra field for each of those with the number 1 in it, and we created a pivot table, which was kind of, in this case, really more of just a 2-dimensional one, or a 1-dimensional one, I guess. And so by doing that, we counted them up, and we ended up with, for each donor number, there was a number between 1 and 5, which represented how many years each of those donors had given at least 2 donations. And so what we did is we then picked those donor numbers that had been given from 3 and above, and we turned that back into a selection file. And that then represented what they classified as their loyal donors. Okay, so that's pretty much as far as I was intending to go. At this stage, thank you for attending. I guess it's now over to Marla, who will hopefully have some questions for me. Now, again, as I said, I'm not an expert, so I apologize if my answer is, sorry, I don't know. So over to you, Marla.
Thanks, Murray. Not any questions registered just yet, so we'll give people a minute to pop those questions in. If you joined us late today, we mentioned at the start of the session that if you do have any questions, if you open the control panel on the right side of your screen, there's a little orange grab tab arrow that you can open that, and you can register your questions there, and we'll read them out on to Murray now. So first one off is from Melinda. Will there be a webinar on VisRep? This would be very helpful. I think you have an answer for that one.
Well, I think we do, and we're not exactly sure whether it'll be the one we do next month, but we are intending to do one at some stage, and that way we will actually go through a lot of what I was doing fairly fast. We'll actually go through that in a lot more detail. There's a lot of options that we haven't used at all in what we've done. Today we're just doing very basic extraction of data, so normally you don't need to do things like subtotals or formatting or anything like that. But there are many, many options that we can use in there. About a year ago we actually ran a course that was about 3 hours, 3.5 hours, where we went into every nuts and bolts about VisRep. But the webinar that we do, let's assume it's next month, but it may not be. But we won't necessarily go into everything, but we'll probably get to most of it. And again, we will show you the sorts of things that you can do and step through examples there. So that's,
thanks, Murray.
Yes.
Auntie has just asked if you can put those websites up again that
oh, sure, yes. Okay, there
and
they
just
are.
While you're doing that, also a couple of people have asked if there's a recording of today's webcast, and there will be. It'll be back up on our website in the next week or two, and certainly in our newsletter each month we have links to all of those, all of our previous webcasts.
And I would actually suggest, if you'd like, perhaps you can actually go through the exact examples, but using your own data, and just see what the information comes out like.
Great. And a question from Melinda is, when is the next update being sent out, or when will it be available?
Okay, it's actually being prepared and uploaded today. So Gary is doing that, so I presume over the next couple of days that will probably, you'll see the email.
And Murray, just some feedback saying thank you very much and good work and great webcast, so that's great to hear from everybody. Again, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them on the screen. We'll leave this open for a little bit longer. And as we've said earlier, that there will be a recording of this session, and of course you can view any of our other webcasts from the Donman website as well. Definitely worth having a look at. And it doesn't look like there's any more questions for the moment, Murray, so we might leave it there. As we mentioned earlier, we do run these webcasts every month, and we're just finalising the next month's topic at the moment, and we'll certainly let you know via email in the next week or two. But that concludes our webcast for today. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Murray. And,
thank you everyone for attending.
Absolutely.
Yep, thanks
we'll
everyone.
See you next time. Thank you.